In 2021, more than 2 million of South African households reported experiencing hunger, with urban areas, particularly the biggest metros such as the City of Johannesburg and Cape Town, associated with high proportions of households that reported inadequate and severe access to food. Now, this is according to a recently released 2021 Stats SA report on the assessment of food inadequacy and hunger in South Africa. Now, high unemployment, poverty, the ongoing energy crisis, with, of course, Eskom announcing stage 6 until further notice, as well as the rising costs of living, further worsened the social economic challenges faced by many South Africans. This contributing to a negative impact on the country's state of food security by making food expensive and now inaccessible to many. To discuss how South Africans are impacted by the rising cost of living, we are joined virtually by Axolile Notywala, who is a social justice activist. Axolile, thank you. Thanks very much for joining us on the program.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
So, I mean, obviously, as a social justice activist, the information that we saw being released by Stats SA, it certainly isn't surprising for you. But, you know, when you start looking at the reality that food is the most expensive thing and many South Africans just can't afford it, this is a very, very harsh reality we're living in at the moment.
It is, and it has been for a number of years. The high rate of unemployment, the very high rate of unemployment, very high rate of poverty are all contributors to the many millions of South Africans that go hungry every day, and the many millions of South Africans that have been going hungry every day over the last number of years. And we saw this quite a lot during the very high lockdown levels in 2020 and in 2021. So the numbers that we're seeing, that we're getting from Stats SA, are numbers that are confirming a reality that many, primarily Black South Africans, have been faced with for over a number of years.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just reading this data that's being released, and perhaps maybe we just put it into numbers so that people can actually hear this. What Stats SA is saying, it showed 2.1 million South Africans, or 11.6% of South African households, cannot afford food. That is, I suppose, the harshest reality that we can give. And these are just measured numbers. I imagine that they're probably even bigger. This is something that I find very, very difficult to comprehend in South Africa at this time.
It's a huge number. These are huge numbers. It's a crisis, and we should call it that. And I mean, there have been people working on this. There have been organizations working on this, but all these efforts have fell on deaf ears in terms of getting those in leadership, those in government, to act and to do something. Children are affected by this. Many South Africans currently are faced with high rates of crime. And many of the contributors to that are such issues at these levels of high unemployment, at these levels of high poverty rates, that contribute and bring up the high levels of crime in which we're all complaining about in South Africa. Mm-hmm. Organizations such as Equal Education have taken the government to court for the government to provide meals in school, because for close to 10 million children, that's the only time that they can have a proper meal in which they can at least eat for a day. So this is a crisis, and we should call it call it that.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, you know, to exacerbate it, we talk about the crisis, we talk about so many South Africans that are starving and a massive unemployment rate, which is only getting worse, because when we look at not only the lack of growth within the economy, we also look at Eskom announcing, because of the shortage of generation capacity, stage 6 load shedding until further notice. And, this impacts any business owner. It doesn't matter how big or small the business is. The reality is that this impact is felt by everybody. I mean, and especially those who are already struggling to live above that poverty line, because people have to let go of staff. Even small business owners, they cannot afford. And that's one of the questions we asked today is, how are people coping without electricity, and do they have alternative sources? The majority of the people are saying we cannot afford anything. We are living without electricity, hence no jobs, no money, no food. This, again, I mean, let's address the whole electricity issue.
Many South Africans are suffering as a result of that. If you are looking for employment, there aren't chances for you to get employment because businesses are letting people go because they cannot continue to carry on running their businesses. And there are many South Africans that when they do not get an opportunity to find a job, they try to run their own businesses. But a lot of these small businesses as well are dependent on electricity, are dependent on Eskom providing power, and therefore there's just no alternatives. There's just no other opportunities, no other ways, no other means in which the many millions of South Africans that are suffering can be able to get out of poverty at the current state of things in relation to load shedding, and again, we haven't seen much in terms of what government is doing about this. We are at stage 6. It's reported that we are also at stage 8 or going to stage 8, and there is no proper plan. South Africans have no confidence in the current way in which the government is dealing with this, or saying it is dealing with this.
Yeah. Look, the numbers speak for themselves. We understand how bad the situation is. But, as a social justice activist, what would you like to see being done? I mean, how do we turn this ship around? From your opinion, I mean, as a normal South African, as somebody that watches people suffering the way that they are, and of course becoming more and more dependent on the state, whether we're talking 350 Rand or any other grant that there is. But what needs to happen? What must government do?
One, Eskom needs to be fixed. Those that have contributed to the destruction of Eskom needs to be held to account, and we need to fix the energy crisis in the country. Two, we need to continue supporting the many community organizations and the many communities that are trying to support their own communities. Those that are running community kitchens, they need resources. They need to be provided with resources so that before going to school, children can have meals, can have a meal. We need to implement a basic income grant in South Africa. We understand that South Africa has the finances, South Africa has the money. It's just poorly mismanaged. And we need to prioritize. We need to make sure that millions of these rands that are being wasted, and the billions of these rands that are being wasted are channeled through providing basic income grant, which also gives opportunities for many South Africans to be able to look for jobs, because the spatial injustice in this country is another contributor in which it gives many South Africans challenges in terms of them having to look for jobs.
Yeah, I mean, we do know that women at the heart of it all, particularly in rural areas, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, if we look at the findings in this report, is that those particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, in the rural areas in KwaZulu-Natal, and women are at the cold face of all of this when it comes to hunger and the issues of poverty. What should be done to help women in particular?
Definitely, it's extremely unsettling. It's extremely sad that on top of the many challenges that women faced, primarily black women in townships, in rural areas, challenges such as gender-based violence, the high rates of femicide. There are also these other challenges that they are facing. And we need to make sure that women are taken care of. We need to make sure that such opportunities prioritize women, especially single parents. My mother is a single parent, and I watch my mother struggling to raise. I've watched my mother struggling to raise me and my brothers, and many more millions of children, and many more millions of women are facing this. We need to find ways in which we support these women to get them out of poverty, because again, there's many challenges that women are faced with, and we cannot continue to allow this to happen.
Children as well. I mean, we look at this report showing that around 683,000 households with children aged 5 years and younger are reported to be experiencing hunger in 2021, and there's a great risk here, and I mean, this can hamper the development of children. This is a major risk that we face. And besides that, there's also the risk of malnutrition. What is that looking like at the moment?
So again, if you look at when there are reports around the levels of education, children that start grade 1 and end grade 12, a lot of these, in terms of dropouts, contribute to that, because many children or many young people are forced to leave school because they cannot afford to be hungry in school, and they have to try and find jobs which are non-existent to support their families. So children are failed at a very young age by the South African government in terms of having to focus in school. Many children, one in 4, which is about 27%, of children under the age of 5 are stunted, and this means that they cannot be able to continue to have the best education possible. Just without mentioning many other failures in the education system, malnutrition is a big contributor to that, and this is a result of poverty. This is a result of many of these challenges that we've mentioned, that we've already spoken about.
Yeah, it's just heartbreaking when you listen to these kind of things, and you realize that the rich are getting richer, and the selected few are, the amount of wastage that's taking place, the amount of corruption, where the money that can be used to help struggling individuals and struggling families is being abused in ways that, you know, it hasn't stopped. And this is a great problem. It's one of the big things where, you know, the middle class is being eaten away, and we're just going to become the system where people that have got all the money in the world versus those that are literally having malnutrition. And this is what you don't want to see happening in a country, and it needs to be stopped in the strongest possible way. What does your organization actually do to try and assist these individuals and to get the message even more out there? Obviously, doing interviews like this does help.
On top of having to speak to government, to speak to those in power, to resolving all these issues, it's important that we continue to encourage and we continue to work with many leaders in our communities that are trying their best amongst the challenges that they are faced with, to make sure that these challenges are eliminated. During lockdown in 2020 and 2021, we saw many community action networks that were formed to respond to such issues, where many communities are establishing and have established community kitchens, and they're starting community gardens so that they can feed their families and they can feed their children. They can be able to take care of those that they can, while they continue to fight and call on government and the state to provide. And I think those that have need to give to those that do not have, and not to necessarily treat this as charity, but we are the most unequal country in the world, and we need to close that gap. We need to make sure that those have are supporting those that do not have, whether with community resources, whether with resources to start these community kitchens, to support those that are starting community gardens. That's a lot that can go a long way. And these are some of the things that we are doing in our communities, and we need more support.
All right, we have to leave it there for this morning, but thank you. Thanks very much for talking to us here on the program. That was Axolile Notywala, who is a social justice activist, talking about the poverty and hunger challenges and, of course, the high cost of living faced by many South Africans, with Stats SA finding that in 2021, more than 2 million South African households reported experiencing hunger.